Ajinomoto.
Before we go for break, we have one final talk from Takeshi Kimura from Ajinomoto. He's going to talk about umami. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Today I'd like to start with a talk about history of umami and then end up talking about taste and nutrition. I have a lot of slides, so please excuse me if I go fast. Okay. So our company was founded in 1909, actually, with the discovery of umami or glutamate as the key umami substance. And Dr. Ikeda basically isolated this substance from the traditional Japanese soup stock that we made with the seaweed. And Mr. Suzuki, actually, at that time, had a business extracting iodine from seaweed. And basically, he heard about this professor who found a new substance from seaweed. So they talked, and then they started a new business to create this new seasoning. And so we're the first company to make market monosodium glutamate. So this is why we're very much interested in umami and other amino acids. Okay. And so one key issue that regarding nutrition is that this is Dr. Ikeda. He was in Germany studying as a student at the turn of the century, around the 1900s. And he studied under Professor Oswald, who later got a Nobel Prize. But the key point is that he's standing up, and other people are sitting down. And so he was so shocked at how the size difference with the Germans. And so rather than study chemistry when he went back to Japan, he tried to find something that would make Japanese cuisine taste better for the average people so that they will have better nutrition. And so he basically found through the traditional Japanese soup stock, umami, and he coined the term umami back then, actually. And this is what he presented in Chicago in 1912, that you can read this, that the complicated taste of asparagus, tomato, cheese, and meat, which is quite peculiar and cannot be classified by any of the traditional tastes of sweet, sour, salty, and bitter. So this is the origin of umami, really, and the word umami as well. In fact, if you look through history, there are similar words used in various cultures, like savory in England and Australia. So this meaty, brothy taste. And I think there was some discussion regarding translating umami into English. And savory was one of the candidate words. But however, we found that in the US, savory, which includes the concept of sweet. So we got a lot of pushback from American scientists, actually, regarding this concept. And so there are a Chinese word, and also Bernard Savarin, who was very famous French taste physiologist. He talked about a taste called osmazome that was a component in meat stock. So we feel that he probably had an idea that a similar taste to umami. So it turns out that actually Dr. Ikeda was very lucky because he used the traditional Japanese soup stock, which is used basically, this is dried kombu, which is seaweed, and then you dip it in the boiling water for a little bit, and then you pull it out. And so what we can see is these are all the 20 amino acids, and you can see that the glutamate and aspartate, these are both umami substances, but extremely high and very pure. So this is why he could identify glutamate as the key component. Whereas if you look at Western soup stock, you can see it's very complicated with many different amino acids. Although glutamate is quite high, it would have been very difficult to identify this as the key component in the taste of the umami taste. Okay. So amino acids have various tastes, and the glutamic acid and aspartic acid, or glutamate aspartate, are the ones with umami taste. And obviously, proteins actually do not have taste, but when you hydrolyze the proteins, you get free amino acids, and these are what has taste. And many amino acids are actually bitter, actually, and a few are sweet. So later I'll talk about some composition of things like smoked, cured ham and cheese, and please remember there are sweet amino acids and bitter amino acids as well. Okay. The first experience we have of umami actually is in mother's milk, as Julie said, that along with sweet, umami is a very key component of mother's milk. And it's very interesting that cow's milk is very, very low in glutamate, but human and chimpanzee's milk is quite high. And this may be to do with the type of the receptors, I think, of umami, because I think in rodents, certainly the so-called umami receptor is more of a broadly tuned amino acid receptor. And so you can see that basically the glutamate is the highest of the free amino acids, enough to taste. And the daily intake of the free glutamates from mother's milk is quite high in terms of an infant. Okay, so we find that there are receptors for glutamate, and the mother's milk contains glutamate. But, although the umami taste was discovered maybe 100 years or so ago, this doesn't mean that the receptor suddenly appeared 100 years ago. So it must mean that throughout history we had umami taste. So can we find in history any activity that increases umami that humans have partaken in? And so I'll talk a little bit about food ingredients inherently rich in umami, as well as some traditional techniques to increase umami. And the earliest evidence of these processes we find is in the fish sources of Greece and Rome that I'll talk about a little bit. Okay, so this is tomato. So tomato is a very savory food ingredient, but you can see that the glutamate level is very high, and as the tomato goes riper, it more increases. And in fact, the very famous Chef Heston Blumenthal co-authored a paper looking at which part of the tomato, sorry about my American there, but which part of the tomato has the more glutamate, the flesh or the pulp, and it turns out the pulp has more glutamate than the flesh. Other vegetables, such as mushrooms, are very high in glutamate, and many vegetables have some umami amino acids in them. Also, when you age beef, the process of the protein degradation obviously produces amino acids, so you do get an increase in amino acids as you age. And also, as you cook your soups and so on, then the free amino acids are released from the vegetables or meat into the soup, so you get an increase in the glutamate level. So you could say that from the early days, there were early days of civilization or human history, there were actual umami-rich ingredients, as well as the early processes that could have increased umami in the food. And today I won't talk about it too much, but inositol is the nucleotide that has a synergistic effect with the glutamate that can increase the umami taste. So the earliest evidence, or written evidence we can find of glutamate use or glutamate-rich ingredients is in the classical ancient Roman remains. These are actual industrial-sized containers for making fish sauce, actually. So basically, they put the fish in there to ferment, and they took it out. So you can see that this operation was a quite large-scale operation. And you can read quite a lot in this treatise by Dr. Robert Curtis, Umami Foods of Classical Antiquity. And so there is an actual garum shop or the fish sauce shop in Pompeii, in the remnants of Pompeii. And behind the shop you can see these receptacles which actually stored the fish sauce, and also these that were used to carry them. And if you look inside one of these dorium, you can see that there were jugs to actually, pour out the umami, the fish sauce. And you can tell that this was fish sauce because you can find the fish bones in the bottom of the receptacle. And actually, because we got permission to sample some of this from the Pompeii site, and we actually did an amino acid analysis. And it turns out the glutamic acid was the highest amino acid there, although very, very little amount, because after 2,000 years you expect it to decay quite a lot. So, unfortunately, we couldn't do sort of carbon dating on the individual peaks, but we did carbon dating on the whole material, showing it was about 2,000 years old. Okay, so the interesting thing was the production method, that basically intestines for fish were mainly used. So intestines obviously contain a lot of enzymes. So basically that was used to degrade the protein into amino acids. But there's a description here about using a strong basket placed into the vessel and then collecting the liquamen, which is equivalent to garum. And I had a hard time imagining how that would happen. And then I found that this picture is how fish sauce is made in Thailand, actually. And basically, there's a bamboo basket that is put into this large vats, and then the fish sauce streams into the baskets, and you use a cup to take it out, apparently. So to me, this indicates that perhaps the Eastern fish sauces really had the origin in the West, maybe, in terms of the Roman and Greek methodologies. Okay, coming to the cured ham, you can see that as you increase as it ages, the glutamate level increases, and that although glutamate is high, you get these are some bitter amino acids and then some sweet amino acids. So you have the combination of the bitter and the sweet and the umami taste there. Whereas if you look at, this is I think for cheddar cheese, mainly you have the glutamate, which is the umami taste, but you have the leucine and the lysine, which are pretty bitter actually. So I think the bitter note of these cheddar cheese is probably from, well, one reason is from these amino acids. Okay, so actually Parmesan cheese is probably the king of the umami sort of traditional ingredients, with about 1.5 grams, that's about 1.5% glutamate levels in the actual cheese. So you can see that actually grating the cheese onto your food is a little bit like sprinkling a little bit of MSG onto the food as well. Okay. Although it does have other flavors, as I said, some of the bitterness as well. It's very interesting that those were traditional methods, but there's a phase in this sort of time frame, about 50 years. There are many sort of industrial methods that came out to make umami-enhanced ingredients. So some of them were things like concentrated beef extract and the Maggi cubes, for instance, or Bovril, Marmite, and bouillon cubes. And the discovery of MSG was right in there. So at that time, obviously, people did not know that it was a glutamate. That was the key ingredient. But they know that if they sort of made the amino acid solutions, it tasted good. So if you look at some of your very favorite sauces and condiments, for instance, Worcester sauce and mushroom ketchup has a large amount of glutamate, as well as Marmite. I think later there will be a demonstration using such material. Okay, so if you look at this in the whole process and try to convert it into how much it costs per gram of glutamate or umami, you find that in cheese it's about $2 or so, soybean $1, soy sauce about $0.50, and yeast extract is about 2 cents. But in the industrial production of MSG, it's about 0.1 cents. So you can see that this whole process has made is very much cheaper. And I think the process of food history and industrialization is basically making affordable the foods that could only be eaten by sort of kings and rich merchants, I think. And just for aside, we have this, this is our product with the panda face, but unfortunately we found out the pandas don't have glutamate receptors, so, so this is a very sort of inconvenient fact. Okay, so I want to talk about, among these, umami has a very good image, but MSG has a very bad image. So I just want to comment on why that is. And basically, there were some safety issues that arose in the late 60s. You heard about probably the Chinese restaurant syndrome. And another researcher injected huge amounts of MSG into newborn mice to show that it had some lesions in the brain. Obviously, the amounts were it's like, injecting a kilo or several hundred grams of MSG in human terms. And so at that time, actually, we didn't have much science base in the company, but we sort of actually, started a lot of research and built a research institute and did a lot of studies to show the safety. And basically, it took quite a while for the safety to be established, shall we say. So initially, there were upper limits placed, and then basically the safety was affirmed. Recently, EFSA came out with a new finding, but since the European Commission is still considering what to do with it, I'll sort of refrain from talking about it too much at this time. Okay, so regarding the perception issues, as I said, most of the safety issues have been solved, but still, I think it took a long time span for the issue resolution, and we didn't do too much PR work during that time, so I think the lack of effective risk communication resulted in the spreading of many of the perceptions. And then also, for instance, in the early 90s or late 80s, there are books claiming MSG was the cause of all illnesses, for instance, from anything from Alzheimer's to cancer to whatnot. And these were taken up by TV, and especially in the US, actually. And then there are some people who complained about the hidden glutamate issue, that, for instance, MSG is on the label as MSG, but if other ingredients, such as hydrolyzed vegetable protein, yeast extracts, although they contain a lot of glutamate, don't have to be labeled as MSG. And also, food companies, as I think as a previous doctor said, that no MSG label and no MSG label are used by food companies to, despite the fact that many of them use ingredients which are very rich in glutamate in place of MSG, they use this claim. So, we feel that basically once you have these claims, people think that, well, there must be something wrong with it. So, so that's really sort of is a positive, feedback loop to encourage that type of thinking. So I think we're starting this type of dialogue with this Nature Café to try to redress this issue, as well as find out what types of things we should be focusing on. Okay, lastly, I'd like to come back to taste and nutrition. So I told you about, Dr. Ikeda was very concerned about the nutritional state. And this was the turn of the century, and he was very small, and Japanese in general very stunted. But this was a similar case in about 1950, post-war, and these are Japanese children then. So, it's like a third world country, really. And then the Japanese government launched a school lunch and nutrition education program. So you had vans like this with dietitians, nutritionists going around, basically educating people about the correct nutrition and what balance you should eat. And these are just to show pictures showing that how much more healthy they became after this type of intervention. And as a result, this is just life expectancy, but the Japanese life expectancy now is one of the top in the world, but back in the 1950s, it was it was certainly much lower than most of the Western countries. So I think this increase in the life expectancy is partly due to these types of nutritional interventions, such as the school lunch program. Recently, much of the death was due to high salt and high blood pressure at that time, but more recently, I think, as you know, many of the risk factors come from non-communicable diseases. And we believe that palatability and perception are very important in this, because you have to affect food choice in order to change behavior in terms of eating proper nutrition. So in Japan, the government has a food and nutrition education program called Shokuiku. And basically, these are school programs that have lessons in nutrition and taste and so on. And actually, we send people, our employees to schools to give lectures on taste, basically. And so we've covered over 100 schools and 300 classes in Japan. But we're also trying to spread this type of activity to other countries. And we have a project in Ghana to for supplemental nutrition for the post-weaning, because they have a lot of stunting. But also we have a project in Vietnam. Today I'll just like to talk about the project in Vietnam. So Vietnam actually suffers from double burden of malnutrition, which is the coexistence of malnutrition and overnutrition. And we have two projects that we work with the Vietnamese government. One is the school meal project, and one is the dietitian system project. Okay. For the school meal project, we have worked with the Japanese Dietetic Association, as well as the Vietnamese government, to provide a school lunch program or menu programs to the schools, so that the dietitians there can actually design very convenient, easily design schools for school meals, basically. And we've also donated Japanese-style modern kitchens to facilitate this. And so they can have a nourishing but tasty meal, basically. And we found that, however, in order to run this, you need some specialists. And we found that there was no dietetics course in Vietnamese universities. So we funded a bachelor's course in dietetics in the Hanoi Medical School. And at the moment, we're presently in the step 3 of nationwide expansion of the education system. And this is all with the help of Japanese government, as well as Japan Dietetics Association and various departments in the Vietnamese government. So it's a very interesting case of public-private partnership, we feel. Okay, so as you know, in the Sustainable Development Goals, improved nutrition is one of the key key issues that was included this time around. And we feel that our company needs to do more in this area. So we have come up with the nutrition policy. And because we make a lot of seasonings, our basic stance is that it's very difficult to make an impact just by the nutritional quality of the seasonings. But if you can actually suggest menus that are very nutritious, yet tasty, I think that can impact a lot of people. So this is what we're trying to do. And also within this, we are trying to use umami, the deliciousness of umami in this whole process. And in order to achieve this, we are also working on a number of other... Which way does it go? Okay, sorry. So physiological issues, or oftentimes people have told us that, well, if it makes things tastier, it must make you eat more and therefore make you more obese. So we have done some studies on how the umami flavor changes appetite. And basically we find that when you preload with umami, then you don't eat as much later on. So it seems to be able to increase the satiety, basically, and hence reduce the total caloric intake. And this was done at the University of Sussex, actually. Sorry, too many E's there. And so we also try to plot, this is unpublished, but we try to plot this is a BMI depending on the country, and sort of MSG intake data from published data and industry estimates. And you can see that many of the Western countries have very low MSG intake. Many of the Asian countries, as you would expect, have high intake. So you can see from here that there's no obvious correlation, in fact maybe a negative correlation with MSG intake and obesity. So to finish, we'd like to contribute to better health and well-being by, I think we're really studying emotional nourishment in terms of the impact, psychological and emotional impact of food taste, as well as the physical impact, and utilize this to change the eating habits as well as the cooking as well, smart cooking, offering easier to cook solutions that are tasty yet nutritious and so on. And so we hope that we can enhance the intake of nutrients and enhance, optimize the intake of nutrients in a smarter and more enjoyable manner. Okay, thank you very much.
Ajinomoto.